Disclaimer. The information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GAN's processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
And thank you for that. That was well said. And so here we go, ladies and gentlemen. We will try and
Yeah, but Alex, aren't you going to play the religious disclaimer as well? Oh, wait, that'll come in the future, I think. Would we need a disclaimer about the soul?
well, I was going to make a snide comment about that, and you have completed it, so I don't have to do that.
Not yet. Hopefully never, but we'll see how this progresses.
Yeah, well, one thing we don't have to do is apologize for being born, do we? Anyway,
No.
having said that,
Yeah.
I want to welcome everybody here, as I said, to the Kesh American Knowledge Team meeting. And when we say American, the implication, of course, is the North American meeting, but it includes the South American as well. But then how do we cut off the Americas from the rest of the world? And this is an interesting conversation because we just had the conference in Sanya, and that's on the other part of the world. And we see that there are a lot of similarities with our world here, but you know, because the Earth is turning around, and in fact, there are similarities everywhere. And this is a good thing. So we found that there was gold in them there hills. Well, there's gold in everywhere. And this is the Kesh Foundation, the Spaceship Institute, Teachings on Plasma Science. We're discussing intermediate transition. Today's topic is Uncut. My name is Alexander. I am from Canada. It is July the 7th, 2024. This is the Kesh Foundation North America Plasma Education Series. So yes, welcome. This is continuation of the thousands and thousands of hours of teaching, both public and private. And as we get more teachers coming on, the hours of the sessions keep getting longer and accumulate. And somehow we try and distill them so that the average person who's been, shall we say, out of the loop for the last 15 years can catch up. And why not? Because that information is in the genes. So it's just a matter of understanding that and accessing that. It sounds so simple. And the fact of the matter is that this information cannot be cut away from you. It is ingrained with you. It is inherent in you. It is an inalienable connection. It's uncut. Uncut comes from I believe, the Greek language, where A is un and Tom is cut. And so when you're looking at the basic atom, they figured that was the smallest thing and you couldn't cut it up. And that's why they called it the atom, the ultimate uncut thing. And of course, ever since they did that, we've had tremendous effort to cut that up. And it has been a dismal failure because we're on the hesitancy highway. We have to understand that this is the lowest energy state. And as well was said, life is hard until you get up on the horse. But which horse? You want to pick the winning horse, don't you? But sometimes it could lead to conflict. And as we know, with conflict, there's always an unpleasant climax. But history could easily be washed away. And we see a lot of information, a lot of societies, a lot of history go down the drain that way. But as we are looking at the universal knowledge, as it's put forward by Maranteva Kolikesh in book number 1, The Universal Order of Creation of Matter. This is an important thing to understand, isn't it? And book number 2, The Structure of the Light. The structure and the light has structure. And as such, it travels. And book number 3, The Origin of the Universe. Well, shouldn't that be book number 1? But as we can see, that 1 splits into 2. An interesting concept. Divide and conquer is another interesting concept. Unify into one planet, one nation, one race for justice and world peace is another concept. And for 333 weeks in a row, Rick Kremen and the Universal Council have bringing forward this concept every Tuesday, so that we all understand that we're all part of the humanity race. And in this race, we're all winners. Because we operate on the plasma highway, but how do we get on that plasma highway? Do we really understand it when we're bogged down in the transmission highway? And that's pretty good. We get fascinated with that transmission highway, you know, radio transmission, TV transmission, cellular transmission, internet transmission. But what about plasma transmission? There's a transition highway, and we're investigating that. This is part of the intermediate transition. We're trying to find out if the speed of light is the constant transmission. Is this a symbol of truth? Is the universe 70% hydrogen? Or is this a symbol of truth? And when we talk about the washing, I looked for Richard Feynman's reference to the thimble of having all the energy in the thimble. And that's been washed away in Wikipedia as in so many things. And so we try and find out, where are we? And when we look on the MAGRAPH pie chart, we can see that we're here. Or are we here? Then wait a second, how can you cut the uncut pie? So there are two forces that come together. This is the basis of the plasma teaching. And as we see in terms of reference of conventional physics, there's an x-axis dimension and a y-axis dimension, brings together these forces. And as you can see, they're positive. But when these forces come together, it could be a point of conflict. And of course, it needs a point of resolution, conflict resolution. And so one of the ways to do that, of course, is to create a point of containment, where you can create the containment for the conflict or you can have a point of containment to resolve the conflict. And we have the capability to make these choices. These are binding choices, and we've made binding choices. Energy binding is very important. It's a very self-serving thing, because in order for us to maintain our MagRav pi, we have to be self-serving. But for some reason, most of us have opted to be self-serving at the expense of others. Well, think about it. The others are also trying to be self-serving. And if you're stealing from them, they have a problem. They are not fulfilling their self-serving obligations. So they have to steal from someone else. And if that's not convenient, then maybe they'll have a point of conflict with you. And of course, when they have a point of conflict, this becomes another form of disruption. So if we understand that the plasma manifestation precedes the physical manifestation, that is not disruption, that is creation. So the disruption is exclusively in the physical manifestation. And we see this because the physical manifestation may manifest differently in different people, although the plasmatic manifestation is the same. And when we say the plasmatic manifestation, we have to understand that there are different energy levels. So this manifestation in the physical manifestation may be obesity, blood pressure, or cancer, just to name a few. But fundamentally, it's tied to the pH. And so we see that in examples of acidity within our blood serum pH, it causes an anaerobic condition. The DNA will expand. And then adenosine triphosphate production will be reduced. And of course, cellular communication will be disrupted. And so this is fairly important because we have over 70 trillion cells in our body. So do you remember Utnapishtim? Do you remember Noah and his ark? Do you remember Noah and his story? And you could rightfully say, well, I don't remember, I wasn't there. And yet we have 7 different continents and 7 different civilizations, and they all have the same story. They call it the Great Flood, which is the great transgenerational wash. So this memory is in our RNA transcription. It's part of our unconsciousness. And this memory is carried forward. We call it karma. So karma is a transgenerational transition. And it's grounded to this earth space. And it's grounded through the blood. And so we have historically spilled the blood into the earth space. And this is a commentary on man's history of war, which is clearly disobeying the fundamental plasma rule where the higher strength feeds the weaker strength. So as this could possibly become a point of conflict, then the higher strength can eat the weaker strength, and that becomes our operation manual for energy binding. And so when we see the energy binding, it's because energy is always moving. And so the negative gives and the positive takes, and when it's giving and take it from itself, well, that's very binding. But when we give and take from others, that energy can be flowing. So we have an opportunity to choose. And so when we understood the basic energy terminology, we found that as the energies come together on the X and Y axis and the Z axis, they represent things like rotation, polarity, and field strength. And we talk about the rotation as being part of the transmission, the polarity is part of the transition, and the field strength is part of the transmutation. But as we've advanced, we found that there is a transmission on the X-axis that is also part of the transition dimension. Because the transmission energy state has not been specified. And so we say the Y-axis can affect the transition dimension, but the transition dimension has not been specified, and it clearly affects the transmission dimension. So what we're talking about is the medium. The message travels on that medium. If the X-axis and the Y-axis is not specified, where do you put that message? So the creation of the universe comes from energy. And energy is positive. But since energy is always in motion, then the charge of the energy is a direction of motion. And if there's a direction, then it's a coming to and going from, a giving and taking. And as we see, the structure of light is in between. It leaves one, goes to the other. But which way? Well, that's unspecified. We're just saying all things in combination. Well, on which transmission level? Well, that's also unspecified. Well, which transition level? Again, it's unspecified. So as we're searching for our outer space, are we just running around the plasma highway to our little pie in the sky? Is that what we're doing? And we always wondering, where are we? Is this where we are? Right here? So, fortunately for us, we have some milestones. We have gravitational confirmation. We can see the hydrogen as a gravitational construct, as a gravitational form artifact of what? Well, we see the magnetical field interact from the sun and the magnetical field interaction with the earth and the magnetical field interaction of other energies, and they come together in a gravitational construct. And it's unique. It has a fingerprint. We call it hydrogen. And hydrogen is one of the elements. So this hydrogen has come together as an energy pack. And that energy pack has different strengths. And that energy pack has to have a containment. And so that containment is a parceling unit. But this is different from a battery. You can hold a battery, that's a parceling unit. But you can't hold the energy that's in the battery. The only time you can experience that energy is when you use it. So you have to have, shall we say, a circuit. A circuit, in other words, a track, a field, a pathway. And are all pathways the same? Are all circuits the same? And as such, how do you choose? So there has to be some criteria. And so this is all part of the principal matter. Well, when we say the principal matter, are we talking about the principal matter? Or are we talking about a principal matter that is part of the principal matter? If you've ever been to a Chinese buffet, they are glorious. And you cannot eat everything. You will only eat something, and you will choose. So the principal matter of the universe is like a buffet, isn't it? So when we're looking at the hydrogen, there's something about the hydrogen that changes its susceptibility. In other words, its potentiation. And we see that it is bound with oxygen in water. And so when that pH is high, it's alkaline, it's gravitational. And when it's low, it's acidic, it's magnetical. But there are all of these other pHs in between. So they're all part of the principal interaction. And so we see that energy is in motion, energy is a two-way street, and there's a two-way transmission and a two-way transition. In other words, the field energies around the sun are self-contained as part of its transition. But the interaction of the field energies of the sun also interact with the field energies of the earth, which are also self-contained. But now, when you have this interaction of energy, that becomes a transmission. And of course, it too is a two-way street. So when you look at the self-containment, the principal energy flow, we see that as far as the Earth is concerned, we are the blue planet. We call it such because we are the water planet. And water is a universal solvent. And we use it to wash things. So when we think about washing things, maybe we think about washing our hands, washing a car, washing our food, washing the dishes, or washing our history. And so when we look at the energy path of the orbiting satellites around this planet, we see a pathway. And we see that pathway go all the way around, but it seems to go in a different pattern from straight up and down or around the equator. It seems to go around in a spiral fashion. And yet the planet rotates on its axis, rotates the equator around the poles. And we can see the Africas, we can see the Americas, and we can see Australia, and they are all part of this planet. And there is no way to cut them out because the constituency of this planet involves all of them. Collectively as one planet. But the energy pathways go from pole to pole. So we see the energy going from the North Pole to the South Pole, but conversely, the energy goes from the South Pole to North Pole. So from a polar point of view, we could say that one way is up and one way is down. Yeah, we could say that. We could say that the North Pole is the top of the Earth, the South Pole is the bottom. We could say that. So we're talking about relationships. And in the plasma science, magnetic and gravitational relationships are always in balance. It's called a mag-grav condition. But there's no such thing as perfect balance in a particular dimension. Because if there is a perfect balance, then it's not visible. So clearly, one dimension cannot see another dimension. And maybe this is the problem where we have the scientific community. The dimension that they operate is in the conservation of magnetic fields and energy. And the spiritual community is dealing with the spirit and the soul. So the plasma science is dealing with the mag-grav balance and brings these other two sciences together and adds to the knowledge. And so we can clearly see that this is going to change the relationships that we have, because there is a law of conservation of energy. But the thing is that there are different kinds of energy, different kinds of levels. But let's say in the physical realm, we have kinetic energy and potential energy. And so we put that in a formula and we find the left side of the initial energy and the right side of the final energy is in balance. However, the kinetic energy is unspecified. The potential energy is unspecified. And the balance point is, well, it's unspecified because energy can be neither created nor destroyed. It can only be converted. And how is it converted? Well, that's unspecified. So, as we say, the perspective of hydrogen is also unspecified, but we see that things change. Things become less stable. Things become less healthy. We say there's a color shift from the blue shift to the red shift. A lot of people think about the red shift as the separation and the blue shift as the convergence. So as we are binding our energies, we have to create boundaries, don't we? And when we create boundaries, we need more space. And so when we create more space, then we create a separation, hence the red shift. But the perspective also includes strength. And so we see that the initial potential energy is strong and the final potential energy, well, that's weak. So there's a consumption. And the rate of consumption is called susceptibility. And so where on this pH of strength are you? So as we gather up the sequence, we find that the fundamental sequence is based on the gravitational attraction. We call it feedback, or the magnetical repulsion. We call it feeding. But we are, because of our energy binding needs, the last man standing. And so therefore, we can make choices. So our needs cannot be delegated. They have to be assumed where we can turn it on and turn it off. That's part of our feeding. Or we can increase or decrease the strength. Would we want to decrease our strength? It doesn't sound very attractive. Well, it affects our positioning. And so in that light, we can enhance or diminish our position. Because in our positioning, we strengthen our position as the last man standing with choices. And so for the benefit of the energy binding system, the stronger feeds the weaker, and those are the rules. So to feed, you have to have a field to capture that feeding. And so we see the x-axis transition as one way to capture it, but then as the y-axis transition, and so the difference being perpendicular to the ground or elevated above the ground. But we haven't specified which ground, and we haven't specified the position, and we can't account for the difference in position. So when we look at the pH of hydrogen, we find that the water splitting always totals a pH of 14. Well, the neutral position for the pH of hydrogen is 7. So what does that mean? That means there's a balance between the acidity at a pH of 7 and the alkalinity at a pH of 7. And that balance is clear. And so when you have clear water, you have a neutral pH. And that neutral acid and alkaline totals 14. But if we unzip this and we go through this y-axis transition and we go through different layers, we find that there's always a balance, say between pH of 6 and pH of 8. 6 and 8 is 14. And so if we choose 5, then we have to choose 9. 9 and 5 is 14. And likewise, if we choose 4, 4 chooses 10. 4 and 10 is 14. So always the water splitting totals 14. So you choose one, you get the other. But how do we move? How do we move along this level? Do we move along the ground, above the ground, or do we move through all the different layers? How do we choose which pH zipper transmission do we take? So when we're talking about the y-axis transition, then we're talking about polarity, up and down motion. And so we see that there are peaks and valleys. And they create a wave. And so we get a vertical wave transportation where things go up and down. So we talked about quarks. And in this y-axis transition, we've seen that a proton is composed of 2 up quarks and 1 down quark. So clearly, this is dependent on things up and down. It is also dependent on colors. So we can see that, well, one up quark and the other up quark, although they're both up quarks, are not the same. So we can understand that up quark and down quark are not the same, but why are the 2 up quarks not the same? So when we look at the density, and density is gravitational because gravity seeks density. So this accounts for the reason that oxygen is part of the water, because oxygen is more dense than hydrogen. And as a result, we see when we talk about alkalinity, that's wetter. But when we talk about acidity, that's more oily. And so we find that our balance point is near the mid-range. And acids, oils, and alkaline water don't mix, not in the middle of the spectrum. But funny things happen when you go to the extremes. And we experience this with the cups of life. So we've seen that things go up and down. So for instance, in the nanocoating process, we had atoms and they become monatomic in their nanocoating. So they're still the same element, but they're not in the same conformity. They represent another point, representation of the inner space. And we've seen that the cups can be different. So in this case, the cup on the left is emotional, the cup on the right is physical. But both of these represent our emotional strength. And we were able to manifest other ganses. These were all part of the radiance manifestation into CO2 GANs and calcium GANs and zinc and copper GANs. And in fact, we had amino acid GANs and water GANs. And since Sanya, we see the gold GANs. So when we look at the cups of life, we understand that different cups and different ganses represent different things. And so when we look at the basic elements of the interaction of our emotions and our physicality, we find that those are two different dimensions and they interact together and they create something. So when we look at this y-axis transition dimension, and we seem to gravitate to this atomic physicality, this uncut physicality, we see that if we elevate in field strength, we will go to the nanocoating process. But it's still a physicality. So in that case, it's not an atomic, it's monatomic. And then if we elevate again, we get into this GAN state, but it's still a physicality. It's not a monatomic physicality, it's a GAN physicality. So each one takes us to a different level of transmission. But what affects the transition susceptibility? And we know that that happens because when we look at the periodic table of elements, look at all the details. The Earth space has a big range. These are just some of them, some that are very relevant to our public teachings. The amino acid, the carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and hydrogen. The sodium, magnesium, potassium, and calcium being the medium. The copper and the zinc being our physicality and our emotional strength. Iron being the anchorage of our blood. And gold being the desire to fulfill all of our wishes, whatever they may be. And then, of course, there's the silicon, which is the basis of this planet, and the sulfur, the energy that drives it all. But as I said, these are only some of the elements. The main element, of course, being the water. But water is not an element. Water is a molecule. It's a combination of two elements, hydrogen and oxygen. And it's in balance, as we said. But you have two small hydrogens and one big fat oxygen, and yet the Maggrav condition is balanced and is round. How is that possible? And then you have this capability of shearing off that electron. And of course, that electron is the negative, but it's a positive energy. So it's a negative in its giving. And that leaves a negative charge on the hydroxyl because it's lost a positive hydrogen. And so this energy that is always in motion is looking to combine. And so it'll either cross over to another, deflect from another, or get involved in a twisting. And that twisting enhances tightening or coiling or tunneling. So all of those are energy parceling units. And they parcel these energy packs which are always in motion. And we discussed a couple of weeks ago the 3 sets of 4 pairs of quarks and how they had 64 combinations, just like the I Ching. And so when we looked at these quarks, they were up or down, top or bottom, charming or cool or strange. But there's no reference. How do you know which way is up? Fortunately for us, as we sit in our chair, we know we're not on the ceiling. But when you look at the genes and you see the RNA and DNA interaction, you don't know which way is up or you don't know which way is coming or going. And so what we're trying to do through our physicality is some kind of gene therapy or gene modification. It can also involve gene mutilation. Interestingly enough, those are all physical modifications, whereas the plasma science involves the restoration to the original genes, the original history, the pre-washed genes. And so when we look at the DNA, we find that the DNA is different. There's a cellular DNA, and that DNA is the same in all the cells in our body. Inside the cells is the mitochondria, and the mitochondrial DNA is different from the cellular DNA. And then, of course, there are vertical people, we call them the plants. Well, they have their own DNA, and as you can see by the variety of plants, there's a variety of DNA combinations. Same is true for the horizontal people, and then so that includes the animal world and the humanity world. We're all part of the horizontal group. And each of us has a unique DNA. It's our fingerprint. It's our gravitational confirmation. And there are 8 billion of us on this planet, and we're all unique, but we're all part of the same family. So when we're looking at the basic structure, this basic DNA comes together in the shape of codons. And so they're not cut. There is no cleavage per se to cut. They follow. You have an initiator, the rest follow. It's automatic. There may be billions of combination potentials, but the blueprint is always the same. And the blueprint is not the manifestation. And that's the difference between what we see with the straight line Euclidean geometry we talked about and the curved Riemannian geometry that takes into account the angular momentum, the angular relationships, and the curvature of one and the curvature of the other. And we haven't said, are they round, spherical, or elliptical? And so when we look at the shape of the Earth, we find that it is flattened on top and it rotates around the equator. We call that the x-axis. And that equator rotates around the poles. We call that the y-axis. And so the y-axis dimension is based on this polarity. And so as we move around on the ground, we move around everywhere on this planet at the same rate. It takes one day to go around. I often wonder, is the car driving at the equator driving faster than the car that's driving closer to the North Pole? Because clearly the distance is shorter. How about if you're just standing still? You're not standing still, you're standing on a rotating sphere. And wherever you are, there's a relationship between the equatorial fields and the polar interaction. And as a result, this facilitates the principal matter interaction. So different principal matter interacts differently at different points and at different field strengths. And we said that 1 and 1 comes to more than 2. Why? Well, because the first one is not the same as the second one. And the combination of the first two, they are part of the feeding dimension. And that combination creates a third dimension, which is part of the feedback dimension. And you still have the first two. So if you have the first two and you have the third, then when you bring the first two together, you can't just end up with 2. And since you are looking at this, you are none of those 3. So we, as the observer or fudger, as we kind of smudge the pie, we live in the 4th dimension. That 4th dimension is a combination of the 3 dimensions. And so getting back to these quarks, and we find that the way they teach it is that 2 up quarks and 1 down quarks equals a proton. But 1 up quark and the other up quark are not the same. So that's the same thing. 1 and 1 is not the same one. But interestingly enough, when we flip it upside down, 1 up and 2 down quarks equals a neutron. Which side is the quark side? Or which side is the right side? How do I know which way is up and which way is down? And with reference to what? And so when we look at the quark math, we throw a little spin on it. A 2/3 spin to be positive and a 1/3 spin to be negative. And so when we make an equation and we see that to create a proton, 2 up plus 1 down, the math comes out to 1. And when we turn that upside down, minus 1/3 plus minus 1/3 is minus 2/3. Plus 2/3 and you end up with nothing, the neutron. So that's the difference. One is one and the other is nothing. But the one and the zero, like in computers, represents a yes or no or a direction. And so this is how we've established this electron fixation. And so this is Richard Feynman's claim to fame the interaction between light and matter. And of course, he knew that he could put all the energy into a thimble. But another scientist, Yuichiro Nambu, wrote the theory of positrons and said there's no creation nor annihilation, only a change of directions of moving particles. And of course, that movement is from the past to the future or from the future to the past. The implication, of course, is that if you're changing directions, you can change the history. And if you can change the history, then you can change the future, isn't it? But how do you know which way you're going? So, to discuss the elements and to discuss the electrons, we took a chart from Wikipedia to show the relationship between the mass of the elements. So in the case of hydrogen, for instance, is a mass of 1. And that mass on the periodic table represents a proton. Now we've seen the proton has a 1. And the number of electrons is 1. But the hydrogen is uncut. It's an atomic element. The electron and the proton are intimately married together into the hydrogen. If they were cut, they wouldn't be hydrogen. And so conveniently, the 1 is a proton, and of course the nothing, well, there is no neutron. Well, when we get into helium, now that's a different story. And when we get into all the rest of them, they all have that same story. That not only do they have a proton, so let's say, for instance, if we go to our favorite, oxygen, it has a mass of 8. So it has 8 protons, 8 electrons, and we say 8 neutrons. But, you know, it doesn't work out in perfect integers, but, you know, we can just fudge it a little bit. You know, it's close enough. Round it off. And just for your enjoyment here, I've listed some of the other elements on the periodic table of elements. And as you can see, well, there's quite a few of them, and they're all unique. But there's a pattern, there's a progression. And each of them are in balance. And each of them has a proton-electron marriage, and each of them is uncut. And there are many, many more. And on this planet, they seem to go up to 118 elements. And as you can see, some of the names have been changed. I'm not familiar with some of them. They must have been changed recently. But it doesn't really matter. The name doesn't matter. What does matter is that there is some kind of pattern here. And all of them are uncut. So when we look at this polarity issue, the North and South Pole, if we were to say, wrap them up into a tube, we could create a horizontal field. And in this horizontal field, we have the South Pole and the North Pole and the South Pole and the North Pole. So opposite poles attract and they create this wave. But what if we were to unravel this tubular field, make it a linear polarity? Then we could say that this is undifferentiated because, like, we don't know what it is. It's just a bunch of north and south poles. But what if we change the rotation around the polarity, the y-axis polarity, and create a vertical field? So now as it rotates, you have the poles also rotate. So the interesting thing here is that when you're looking at the y-axis transition dimension and you're looking at the planet, how it rotates, it's like a big fat atom, isn't it? It's like a big fat maggrav. Has a north pole and a south pole, and it rotates around. It rotates around the equator. What causes the rotation? Is it the wave action, the sine wave action? The movement from the North Pole to the South Pole, the polar flipping? Is it the up and down motion? When we climb up the stairs, we're going up. What happens when we get to the end of the stairs? It's a long way down. But it's down to the bottom of the next stairs. And from there, we go back up again. But it's not the same pH because you're on a different staircase. And this is the reality of the atomic physicality. So if we were to look at this magnetic field, and let's say, for instance, look at a magnetic induction field around an electric motor, and let's unzip it, right? Let's uncoil it. Let's flatten the curve, so to speak. It's the same induction field, but it's no longer cylindrical. It's now linear. Let's think about this for a moment. If we look at the bending and we find that in the bending, the higher the surface to volume, the higher the negative charge. So as we bend our shoulder, bend our elbow, bend our wrist, or bend our finger, we are creating oxygen. We're also creating hydrogen. You can't create one without creating the other. And the reason for that is because we're full of GANs. And that GANs is fluid. That GANs is a plasma water. Not the same as the water that's flowing into rivers or the water that is washing our history. And what gives it the structural stability? Well, we have to get to the core of the matter. Let's think about this. Part of the coiling is you have to have a pattern. Well, this is a strange pattern. Some would say it's kind of diamond shaped. But if we coil that, we can clearly see that there's a growth. But this growth is not circular, it's spiral in its growth. And of course, there are brilliant people out there who have found a very practical use for this spiral growth. And in order to allow it to get together and to grow, you had to have at least two layers, an inside layer and an outside layer, so that you could, shall we say, glue the spiral together. And then, of course, once you achieve that, then you see how the spiral growth continues. For instance, there are many form artifacts out there that are representative of the same thing. In other words, the cellular tissue of a plant, for instance, when you look closely, it grows in a spiral form. When you look at the strands of a web and you look at it closely, you find that that woven web is woven in a spiral manner. So this knowledge is not exclusive to humanity, is it? Unfortunately, we have a practical application for that, so we've created this tubular form artifact. But the question is, where else have we seen this spiral form? And so we see the relationship between the hexagonal gravitational form of protein and the pentagonal magnetical form of sugar. And it creates this twisting susceptibility. But the question is, when you have the form artifact, was it cut from a broader cloth? And then when you see the form artifact, then the question is, well, which one is uncut? Well, the thing is that when you have the one and it twists and creates another one, it can no longer be part of the first one. It is one, but it is a different one. And yet the twisting susceptibility continues. So now you have 1 plus 1, and it creates more than 2. And it continues. And so this is the thing about the motion. When you move in one direction, the foreground objects move in another direction. But this movement is not decided. The balance of power sits elsewhere. It's unseen. And so the pH of perspective creates a scenario of intensity where you have more intensity and less intensity. And we all understand inverse square law, but there's an anomaly there. We'll talk about that later. But the point being is that there's a source and there's a destination. And the susceptibility in between determines what it is by mass and volume, and hence the periodic table of elements. And so when we look at the pH of quarks, there's no mass and there's no volume. Where on the pH scale do they belong? We have a plasma shift from a plasma state to a GaN state to a nano state to a matter state to a small m matter state, all of them going in a progressively lower and lower energy state, but it's a two-way street. They go back up. So the lowest energy is heat and electricity. And then we see the blueprints of the quarks, the I Ching and the DNA. We get into nuclear physics and the light matter, and then we get into plasma physics, the dark matter, and then the principal matter, the interactive energy transfer state. And because they're higher energy levels, they are gravitational. So that gravitational orientation is different from what we see as the gravitational orientation of the planet. This is the gravitational orientation of the plasma shift. And so oxygen is a gravitational conformation because it is more dense. And it is a fundamental product of this planet. And it has a unique fingerprint, has a unique color spectrum. But it too is representative of the field strength coming from the magnetical field forces of the sun interacting with the magnetical field forces of the earth, interacting with the magnetical field forces of the universe. Not hydrogen, but oxygen. So when we look at the physicality, and we call it the atomic physicality, it's atomic because it's uncut. And so if we are at a pH of 5, we have to have another opposite field at a pH of 9. 9 and 5 is 14. The 5 is uncut. The 9 is uncut. Same is true for the relationship between 6 and 8. So the pH transmission level is uncut, but the y-axis transition is unspecified. So when we summarize this whole thing, it's all based on feedback, isn't it? Sound, light, heat, pressure, luster, superficiality, laminar containment. These are all part of the x-axis transmission dimension transition. It's the dominance of man-made range deviation. We call it the conscious awareness. It overrides the unconscious awareness. Really? The y-axis transition dimension is exposed. So we see that the oxygen-rich blood becomes the Earth space polar y-axis transition form artifact. It's often referred to as life. So the transmission spectrum is the non-visible viral spectrum orbitals. The transition of visible transmission spectrums, a spectrum to a spectrum based on susceptibility, where you see the surface superficiality based on the internal substance. The physicality is based on the plasma substrate. The relationship of gravitational to magnetical, and wherever it is a point of containment. But that point of containment is within one step beyond, above and below, if you know which way is which. The y-axis transition dimension is actually a communication antenna that has to stay within the range transition. So the release of the binding energy precedes the retrieval of the beneficial energy. The field release has to precede the field capture. The giving has to precede the taking. The emission has to precede the absorption. So motion itself cannot exist without coexistence, because motion is a product of existence. Motion and coexistence reside in both matter states. So when we talk about tuning, we have the plasma dominant tuning precedes the physical dominant tuning. And so this tuning of the range transition is by nearness and proximity and not distance. So the y-axis transition dimension, well, it's not man-space centric, that's for sure. And it's probably not Earth-space centric either. So maybe it's sun-space centric. But for sure, it's dimension centric. And the proximity is dimension centric, and the nature of pressure is dimension centric. So we're talking about three transmission dimension. What is the message, and how is the message contained? Which transmission dimension carries the folding deviation? So we know that the quarks in the I Ching and the DNA are historical and transgenerational blueprints for energy transfer state to matter state, but in an undifferentiated state. The uncut state is differentiated. So the Magrav state is uncut. The physicality is uncut. Obviously, the atom by name is uncut. But therefore, so is the monatomic nanostate, equally the GaN state. Therefore, the plasma state. Therefore, the field state. Therefore, the universal state is also uncut. And this is the problem with the old math. When we look at the new atomic, the new uncut math, we see that the neutron mass equals the proton mass plus the electron mass. But we have to add the mass of the PM6 plus the total mass of the matter, antimatter, and the dark matter, because the totality is achieved through the energy level balance and positioning. So when we're targeting our outer space, we have to realize that we're in a gravitational Earth space and we're looking for a gravitational some space. And so there has to be a range between the magnetical gravitational fields and the range between the materialization and dematerialization characteristics of our nature that takes us from one manifestation point through the transparency point to another manifestation point. And these manifestation points are all part of the matter plasma dimensions. And some are physical and some are plasmatic. But these are matter state dimensions. And man is feedback dominant, meaning very physical. But the matter plasma is also part of that domination. Because the message is in the feeding and the feedback manifestation. We're just an antenna. And in order to understand the transmission, we have to understand the tuning transition, where you select up one force, which is uncut, and balanced by a force selection of another uncut force. These resulting selections feed manifestations. And this is a manifestation selection. And the selection manifestation is therefore predetermined by choosing the P stone of intention. You as the last man standing. Your range transition affects a standard folding deviation and leaves no room for error. So the y-axis transition balance is to and from this P stone. So when we're talking about the plasma balance, sure, knowledge and wisdom can give you deeper insight. And of course, experience will change a man's perspective. But the misconduct becomes harder to rationalize. The historical reference becomes meaningless. The pH balance becomes the polar balance. And the plasma balance is uncut. So when we see the potentiation layers of the pH of the maggraph, there are many points on the perspective scale. Or the pH of war, too many warriors discovered too late. They maybe start out on the horse, but they end up on the ground. And we see our blue planet, because of this misunderstanding, the bloodletting is turning the planet red. So when we look at the polar scale, we see that there are many points, many layers. And it's a two-way street. And now we see the relationship between physical motors and plasmatic motors. We see how the linear electric motor is basically the flattening of the curve. And peace, there are many points on the dove. Many points for peace. The pH of peace is mandatory if we are to travel and do the transmutation through the universe. And the transmutation testing begins this month for the next 4 months. From July, August, September, October. Book your seats now. And of course, the research needs to continue because this is part of the real space plasma research. Join the team. Make history. We are in the post-March 15th era of 2024 where we can make some choices, be part of the new selection process to look for that graceful inner space that will take us to outer space. That we become part of the greater oneness, transcending the limitations of nuclear science as we've been teaching for 545 weeks in a row through the Knowledge Seekers workshops. The education continues. Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute Teachings on Plasma Science is welcoming all the beautiful knowledge seekers, learning about the new selection process of the new plasma science. Yes, it involves the World Peace Treaty, and you need to sign it. Sign it with a pen. Sign it with your soul. Sign it with your heart. And sign it with true intention. Because man is the reactor of a three-dimensional universe. And yes, you can find heaven through the field transition. So can you go into outer space without a peace stone? I doubt it. And mining the transition dimensions of truth and history, well, that just changes things, doesn't it? It allows you to stay within the ranges of standard deviation of honor. The honor of the truth, of the bargain, of the deal that you agreed to when you were born. And if you understand that, then we can navigate through the uncut fields. We can navigate through the uncut fields of the physical transmission dimensions. And so plasma science needs to be delivered daily via the peace dome in exchange for peace on Earth. So yes, welcome to the new outer space age. This is the end of the lesson. It's also the end of the intermediate transition series. I hope you've enjoyed this. Thank you so much for participating.
Thank you very much, Alex, for delivering. Do we get certificates or anything since we graduated from this session, from this section of teachings? Or is that too much in the matter state?
I'd gladly give you a hamburger today if you would pay me next Tuesday.
Sure. I'm sure people have many questions. We're hoping they'll voice them, but let's keep it to about 2 questions per participant, so Alex doesn't get tired out here. I know he's been going for a while. So let's, who wants to join the conversation, or who wants to open this up a little bit more? Again, I see you showed the spider web, but I was also thinking, Alex, of if we're in our easy chair with the television in front of us and we have a remote control with 180 channels or 1 trillion channels on it, is our movement within this spherical ball of the plasma any different than just pressing a button on the remote and switching to another channel? One channel, I want to be on the planet Earth and see the beauty of it, so we switch to that channel. Now I'd like to go to outer space, so now there's another program being displayed about space or space travel, so I go there. Is our movement, which I don't think there's any real movement within the plasma, in a way, the plasma is spinning around us. We're in the center of it in so many ways. So we have all these channels open. Is it just as easy in a way as switching a remote to a different channel? I want to see the mom. I can interact with the mom. It's time for me to pick up my child at school. I come back to the physicality. I go pick up the child. While I'm waiting, I can go into that same dimension and do something else. Here's the child coming out from school. Now we go back home. I'm back in the matter state, driving the car and the rest of it. Is it that simple, do you think? Have we overcomplicated this whole process in a way? By overcomplicating it, we limited ourselves?
So yes, we have, and there's nothing more vexing than someone saying it's really simple. It's always simple when you know how to do it.
Exactly.
But where we've been all this time is we didn't know that we could. Okay, because there were many examples. So we've watched the history with all these examples, and you know, the knowledge has been changed, and it's been changed with a agenda. So the agenda is changing to fit the narrative, and the narrative fits the agenda. And that narrative is an earthbound agenda. And yet we were born from a universal community. So the obvious answer comes when we find out that we can engage with the universal community, and you say, well, that makes sense, because everything else doesn't make sense. And the reason it doesn't make sense is because it doesn't add up. So if you're trying to cut up a field, whatever you cut will still be a field. Right? You can make the field smaller, you can make the field bigger. You can go from one field to another field. That's the nature of a field. It becomes a field when it has substance. So the going from one field to another field is the abandonment of one point of substance and moving to another point of substance. In the unknown, that requires a certain kind of bravery, a desire to explore. And I often wondered, how brave was Christopher Columbus to travel across the Atlantic and discover America? And how did all the sailors feel when they discovered America? Did they rejoice and say, oh, we are the first ones here? Or did they have this, as a fearless leader would say, have a Jesus moment and say, who are all these people? And why are they greeting us?
I think he had the maps as opposed
Yeah,
to the,
yeah.
he
So
had
much
the
for
sailing
courage,
maps.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, your courage in a bottle.
Oh, I would still say it takes quite a bit of courage to travel across the ocean in some of these ships. They probably were stronger than I think they were, but it does take quite a bit of courage.
Well, of course, especially the longer the trip and um, obviously the longer the trip, the closer to the destination, but at that point is the weakest in terms of determination and conviction. And however, the ultimate conviction, of course, was the fact that you had a crew of convicts, a crew of prisoners. And I think that's where the problem lies, and to be the captain of that crew, you had to be pretty tough, as you say. So, yes, I agree with you on that point. But, if you try and put yourself in that scene, which of course requires an extreme imagination because it's unlike anything that you've experienced in your current modern day history. But imagine, if you will, that you're greeted by these people who are welcoming you and giving you everything that you need. And you suddenly feel this urge to kill them. You suddenly feel the need to rape and pillage and load up the ships and head back, shall we say, home. Really, a thinking man would have trouble with that. As I say, knowledge changes your perspective, doesn't it?
Absolutely. You say we need to get on this plasma highway, but I think we've been on the plasma highway. We come from energy, we manifest in the matter state, and then we go back to energy. It's almost like the highway that we travel on, these expressways and so on, but we've pulled over to the side of the road at the rest stop, and we forgot that we can get back on this plasma highway in so many ways. I think we're stuck in a way in the rest stop. We've pulled over to the side of the road, and we thought that's all there was. But now we're being opened up to this other dimension that we've kind of forgotten about. So we're all on the plasma highway, whether we want to acknowledge it or not, because we know we will at some point in time, as Mr. Cash said, the final call, the final bell will ring, and then it's time to leave. So I think we've been on this highway, but now we're going to be able to play in these both dimensions, even though, again, we have been in the what we call the work of the soul or the dream state. So, but now we're going to actually interact with our intention and emotions into this spherical rotating plasma. Again, we're in the center of it. So whatever field, whatever energies you'd like to, I'm sure there's more to it, but in the general term, I think we can definitely change or switch into these dimensions and back into, just like the light switch, on and off. We can go into these, and again, systems will be made available to help support the whole process, but ultimately it's existing within ourselves. We just have, again, ignored it.
Well, yes, but historically speaking, that quality or capability has been reserved for a special group of people. So now all of a sudden, you don't have to be part of that special group of people. And the thing is that even though there are many who are not part of that special group of people, but have that special characteristic, if you will, they are not recognized because the narrative is that you need to be part of a special group of people to have that special capability. And so it's not you. Well, this is where the limitation comes in. So, here we are trying to navigate through these physical transmission dimensions using physical transmission rules. And yet we weren't born that way. And that's really the anomaly. And, who do you turn around and ask? So, in many ways, I know my parents had really, really good intentions, but I couldn't talk to them about this. I had to talk to a stranger. And the thing is that it wasn't that I had to talk to a stranger. I didn't know I had to talk to a stranger until the stranger was talking to me. And the thing, my first reaction was I had to visibly measure the number of steps to the door and calculate how fast I could escape. And then I came to the, realization that I had to make a choice right there and now, that either I escape and leave this behind, or that I stay and do further investigation, which, took into consideration the delay and consequences of sort. But, is it that kind of commitment that would lead to blackmail? Is it that kind of commitment that would challenge your honor? Is it that kind of commitment that would compromise your values, that would go against your soul? It wasn't that. It was a bigotry. It was a prejudice. Prejudice is pushed on us on all fronts. It took me a long time to figure out that everything that was advertised on TV, almost by rule, was not good for you. And things that were not advertised on TV were not available to you. You had to work to get it. And the I refer to the energy drinks as a perfect example. Here in Canada, you can go to any store almost and get an energy drink. But something that is good for you, you almost doesn't matter how much money you have, you can't buy it. There is no store to buy it in. You have to make a special trip. Well, those who make that special trip are special people. And we're all going to be looking forward to this special trip, because this is the way that we can really find the truth about who we are and our history and what our sense of being is all about. That really puts a stamp on the meaningfulness of life. Because otherwise, as you say, to be able to sit at home and enjoy the comfort of the easy chair and the TV and the remote control, to be able to flick the channels, and that makes you a very special person.
Just using it as an analogy for the different positions we can go into. If we learn how to switch, to create that switch back and forth consciously.
Yeah, but you see, you're not switching channels. You're actually
You are the channel.
yeah, you are the channel. Can you imagine? Let's say you're watching.
Just an example. It's
No,
just,
no,
I
it's a
see
big example.
I see a similarity, that's all.
Well, let's say you're watching the, what do you call it? The
The
European,
greatest game, okay.
the European finals right now that are going on. Okay, and so they're being played in Germany, but they're not being played in the same city. So you're on a TV, and you've paid for a special satellite service, so you can watch the games on TV, and you flick the channel, right? Now imagine if with that same channel changer, you don't flick the screen, you flick yourself. And so one moment you're in
Yeah,
Düsseldorf, and next moment, you're in
intention
Berlin.
and emotion. This is the controller you have in your hand, as opposed to the TV remote. Your intention and your emotion. I'm watching the game on one channel. Now I want to go in the ocean. I see the whales diving deep. I'm part of that. And you can switch it. You don't need the TV or the remote. You can switch just through intention and emotion. But again, it needs to be perfected. It's just not.
It's also a very radical change, and for some people it could cause palpitations.
Mhm.
Okay, because their grounding is based on a rock solid foundation, and they will find themselves with their feet dangling in the middle of the air, and they won't know which way is up, which way is down, and it could be very ungraceful, and this is part of the problem. So in order to understand that gracefulness is inherent within, and that you have to have the confidence to trust that, this is a big deal, especially, imagine if you were a executive, and all your life you've been running businesses here and there, and barking out orders, and of course, you become, famously successful and wealthy. All of a sudden, in order to participate in this exercise, you have to be humble, and you have to, engage, uh, be part of. You have to lower your energy. It's a traumatic experience. It really is, because everything that you've patterned your life for has been grounded on that false premise. So this change has to be done on a graceful basis. But as we said last week, as a soldier of fortune, the truth can come very suddenly. You don't have that grace period. So it behooves you to prepare. It behooves you to prepare for that transition. And that's what we're doing here with the plasma science, where we're preparing ourselves. So not only that we can do it, but that we can teach others to do it and prepare them. And we will have, firsthand experience.
Okay, I know I've exceeded my question limitation, so let's open it up to someone else. I see Selena has joined us. Hello, Selena.
I
Hi.
see.
How was the
Hi, hi, Mark. Hi, Alex.
how was the Bengali meeting yesterday?
It was very good.
And can you tell us what time you're in the Eastern time zone, I think?
My time is 8:30 at the morning.
8:30 in the morning. Okay, in the
AM.
public in
AM.
Bengali with
Right, right.
Mospec.
Yeah, Mashpek, Sreta, and a few
Yes.
people.
It's a beautiful meeting. Feel free to join. It's mostly in Bengali, but if you come in, they may accommodate you the way the Brazilian team does. So
Yeah.
yes, go ahead, Selena. Thank you.
Yeah, if we have language, what is converter? Convert English or something.
Oh yeah,
There is a lot of information in there.
this
When
is
we
coming.
talk, yeah, when we talk really deep because we're not like teaching where we like conversation each other, and we go deep and deeper of whatever the subject come, and then we talk about that very deeply. So there is a lot of information sometimes.
Well, thank you for joining
Thank you.
us. And
Mm.
you're all invited to any of the public meetings of the Kesh Foundation. It's open to
Yeah.
everyone, whether it's in Italy, Bengali, German, wherever on the planet, in the African as well. So we're
Yeah.
all invited publicly in any of the sessions. The Iranians have a public session as well. You're just not going to hear English if that's your primary language in most of these other communities. But again, we can listen through the ear of the soul rather
Yes.
than the actual words. You'd be surprised. I've done this a number of times. Yes. But did you have
Yeah.
a question, or did you want to share something with us?
Not any question, but I have little experience, so I thought maybe I can share a little bit about the transmission. Huh? Uh,
Okay.
I always in Bengali teaching, not always. Sometimes I say we are inside God, and God lives inside me. I feel that way. I feel that way. The total thing is one, and we are inside it, and that creator blueprint inside our body, inside us.
So like the
So
Russian dolls, a doll within a doll within another doll within another doll?
yeah, I feel that way. And sometimes I tell too much fact. Oh, I feel sometimes creator is like a big brain or big computer, is in the brain when the neuron spark. It's like that. When the spark happen, we are in that point. So I don't feel I'm separate or we are separate. It's like a big mirror. If you broke a big mirror, it 1,000 pieces. Some are bigger, some are smaller, but you can see yourself all pieces in all pieces.
Mhm.
So the same thing. Our self is the same thing. It's not separate. And if we want to transmute, we don't have to go anywhere. Everything inside us
I
it's
agree.
like a it's like a channel, TV channel or radio channel. Just change a band, and everything has frequency or some vibration. If you can match that, you can instantly you can go there. You don't have to go. You can feel that thing right there. You don't have to go anywhere. So
I agree. Unless you want to do the full transmutation and manifest yourself on the moon, on Mars, in a different universe, and take up whatever. If you want to go into the dimension of physicality, you would take up that dimension of that position.
no, I have that is everybody saying, but I have different points of view is
Okay.
in little bit in there because I saw myself in the I told you I before, right? I saw myself in the ship. I am navigating the ship and then other places. So
In
there is
the
a body.
energy dimension, yes?
Yeah, yeah. But sometimes I see my body. So if we go anywhere, if we need body, we make body in there. So
Mhm.
we don't have to carry this body in there, but there we can make another body. I feel that way, but I know it is my experience. I don't have to take everywhere in this body in everywhere. Uh, if I
Absolutely.
need, I can make body in there, and I do think so. So
Right. And if Rick used to say that 95% of the universe is energy and 5% matter state. And when I mentioned that to him last week, he said, no, now the scientists are thinking the universe is about 98% energy and maybe 2% matter state. So
it could be.
do you need to manifest in the matter state to explore 98% of the universe?
No,
No. It's all done. I mean, the creator is in that dimension of energy. Mitra is the dimension of physicality, the lover.
yeah, we are the part of creator. Creator is part of us. So why we need anything else?
Mm-hmm.
We are one. That's it. Thank you
Yes.
for listening.
And as we hear in that New Tomorrow video, all the created things we're going to have as a gift from the creator in a way, the understanding, the ability to transmute between the two dimensions. This is what's been promised and this is what's being delivered.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyone else would like to bring a thought or a question or something maybe we've missed that you'd like to point out? And again, nobody's going to be jumping on you or saying, no, 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 this is not the way it works. It's beautiful to let the flower bloom in the way it decides to bloom. Of course, we can elevate it and help it to show its beauty as well.
Yeah, we are only expressing our emotion, our feelings.
Mhm.
Our yeah.
So I was hearing someone, not from the Kesh Foundation, but they were saying in the core, Alex, that what was he saying? Something about millions of tons of neutrons are being produced every second. within the core of the planet. And I think they were saying this is part of the process of the rotation of the planet. Now, do neutrons have weights? I know some people say the neutron doesn't exist, but we do read about it and hear about it. The hydrogen not having a neutron, as I understand it, but would that make sense that that pressure of those millions of tons per second of neutrons being created in the core could actually cause this planet to rotate? I just thought I'd bring that up. It does sound very feasible to me.
So I'll answer that question in my limited knowledge, and that is that the neutrons are actually fields, and these fields are bigger than the electron-proton combination. But how much bigger? And this has always been the question, because when we look at the periodic table of elements, we find that there's an anomaly. And that is, even though we've organized it on integers, it doesn't always work out, because, like, for instance, when we look at the mass of hydrogen, it's 0.00784 more than 1, and the mass of oxygen is 0.0001 less than 16. So the point being that the mass is the addition of the electron, proton, and neutron. And yet, when we take the mass of the neutron as on average, we find that we always have to fudge a little bit to make sure it follows this pattern. So what I'm going to say is that the neutron is a generic term, like a car. It doesn't tell you how big it is, doesn't tell you how much mass it has. It is in a shall we say, a fluctuating state where it can expand and contract and still maintain its mag-grav condition of being a neutron. And so the expansion and contraction is going to be determined by the amount of energy that it absorbs and the amount of energy that it retains. It also is going to be dependent on the kind of energy that it absorbs and retains, because by changing the number of the mass number, you can actually change the element. So for instance, to go from nitrogen to oxygen, you have to change the integer number. So what causes that change? And this is the problem that we have with the neutron, is that we're saying that it creates this energy. The neutron is a field that contains energy, and when you have a field that contains, that becomes a mag-grav. And now, when it's a mag-grav, is a magnetical gravitational relationship. And in order to maintain that mag-grav condition, it has to be uncut. And if you were to cut a neutron into a atom that is smaller, so for instance, in the fundamental cutting, where you have a neutron becomes an electron-proton combination, but also in the process, it creates a PM tick. The question then becomes, is the neutron then sacrificed? In that process, yes, that neutron is sacrificed. But does that mag-grav condition that houses that neutron, is that sacrificed? No, it's not. Because you could have a copper wire and energy can go through it and around it and however, and it'll come and go, and that copper wire remains. So the process of transmitting that energy does not affect its physical stability as a copper wire. So when we're talking about one neutron being sacrificed, another neutron is being manufactured at the same point. Has to be replaced. Has to. Otherwise, the wire would disintegrate. So science has accommodated this by talking about the slow decay, half-life, or something. Nuclear reactor may take 50,000 years to decompose. So that aspect is basically true. So as we see with the Earth's rotation, that at some point Earth was able to sustain dinosaurs. It's not able to do that now. Why? Because dinosaurs are heavy, and the Earth over a period of thousands of years has progressed closer to the core. When it does that, it becomes more gravitational. So the dinosaurs wouldn't be able to stand up. They would need an enormous amount of strength. So, overall, you look at the size of the horizontal people or the mammals, and we find that the biggest mammals are in the sea because the buoyancy of the sea can accommodate for the mass. But on land, what would you say? The elephant,
The condition doesn't allow it.
Exactly. So there you go. And if you look at the rhinoceros as being very similar to prehistoric creatures, or the alligator, well, these are very compact, very low to the ground, and very solid. So they are able to exist in this environment. So the environment is changing, and as the environment is changing, then we have to change as well. And the thing is that the ability to retain that energy also has to change, and so that has to be accommodated for. And so on this planet, the oxygen is fundamental for life on this planet. But life on another planet, may require another fundamental component. And if we expect to go to that particular environment, then we have to change accordingly. So right now, we have two bridges to cross, if you will. One is to understand the capability of transmuting on this planet. So staying within our environment and keeping our conformity the way it is. And the other is to be able to transmute on this planet and change the conformity. Well, that's the only one that we have to bridge, because if we can change our conformity on this planet, then we can change our conformity on any planet. That's the reality. We don't really have to segregate the notion of transforming our conformity on this planet or transforming it to another planet. Transformation is transformation. Transmutation is transmutation. So we need to combine the two, and we have, not learned that lesson because the teachers on this planet have forbidden us. It's part of the forbidden knowledge. Imagine that. The knowledge of life is forbidden. What a concept. So that has never made sense. But that has not been a topic of discussion either. And the reason for it is because in the plasma rule, the stronger feeds the weaker. In earthbound rule, the stronger eats the weaker. And this has been the historical reality. And, you know, how do you rationalize? You are the shepherd, and you are the butcher. The hand that feeds ends up being the hand that kills. This is the resolution we have to go through.
Okay, anyone else? I know there's a number of people clamoring to ask a question in the background. Who else would like to join the conversation? I always thought the soul was just a mass and it had no weight. And I'm sure you've heard of Mr. Kesh has talked about this, you know, where they've actually had people who were nearing the final separation or the final bell to be on a table or on a bed that could precisely weigh them. And when the soul departed, or when that final bell was rung, they noticed that the person actually became a number of grams lighter. So we know the plasma has a physical aspect to it, but does the soul have a weight? It would appear by scientific testing it does. Or is that the energies? Can we weigh energies, Alex? Is that what's where the soul of physicality is giving its energy and the physicality to the soul? And is that the weight loss that the scientists have seemingly measured?
Um, yes. In a way, it is because the mass is converted into weight based on the environment. So the absorption of the energy contributes to that density.
Okay.
So, right? So yes, the answer would be yes in that regard. But you know what has the question really is what is the technology? What is the big deal? What is it that is so um, causing so much discomfort to a certain group of people, and why is it so elusive, you know, to the rest of us? Why is this such a big hurdle, and why is there so much resistance? So, you know, when you talk about secrets, usually those secrets are to hide misconduct. And you know, why are we trying to hide this misconduct, and why is there misconduct in the first place? And you know, is there misconduct in the universe? Well,
Well,
we operate by a different set of rules on this planet. This is what I'm trying to say, right? And if we would change the way we would operate, then we could change the outcome. You know, and that I mean that is the thing. That is really, you know, they say the definition of insanity, if you do the same thing, you expect different results. Well, that is insanity. But if you do the same thing and you get the same result, you know what that's called? That's called manufacturing. Okay? That's called progress. All right, because you know you're creating something. If you're doing the same thing, you're doing it the same pattern, you will get the same thing. So that is the reality, and that is a welcome reality. All right. So then to say that there's a part of the reality that is unwelcome because it is you know, still trying to do the same thing. And what is that same thing that we keep trying to do? And that is to be in a state of conflict, a state of war, a state of energy binding at the expense of others. And you know, to fight for peace is the same thing and expecting a different result. You know, we just seen the first-hand case where you know, the leader of Hungary visited the leader of Russia, and the purpose was to navigate some kind of course towards peace, and he was criticized. And from my point of view, the amount of discussion about peace has been, well, fundamentally in you know, non-present. So, you know, any discussion about peace and being part of the Knowledge KESH Foundation, any discussion about peace would be welcome and should be encouraged. So not frowned upon and condemned. And so as soon as you do that, then you understand that the rules for some are not the rules for others. And that's an anomaly right then and there. So that's a clear identification. So how can we change that? And we cannot change it based on these rules that promote the continuity of the history of man and the gravitation to war. We cannot continue to do that and expect different results. We have to change the way we do things if we want to change the results. But it's not like we don't have an example. We have the sun, we have the planets, we have the universe, we have the beauty around us, we have the earth environment, heaven on earth here. Over to you, Mark.
Okay, anyone else have something they'd like to share or contribute? And again, I think it's been a systematic plan, Alex, to keep knowledge or to keep universal knowledge away from most people because they're easy to abuse. And this is what Mr. Kesh is short-circuiting, that no one will get abused due to this lack of knowledge. And we're all abused because of that, at least in parts of our lives. As we're maturing into this understanding, there's less probably abuse taking place. We can kind of see through a number of these fallacies. But that's the whole reason that it's due to a lack of knowledge that we get abused, or humanity as a whole. So we thank the foundation for opening this up. Anyone else before we close? I'm going to play Keep KESH Foundation Free for Humanity. This becomes part of your service to humanity in a way, volunteering and becoming part of these monthly sessions, different conferences and other interactions you can order through the KESH Foundation website. But we do want to keep KESH Foundation Free for Humanity, and that's why it's been tried to be taken over by a number of very powerful individuals on this planet. Again, to abuse us for a lack of knowledge, and to keep this knowledge in a way contained in a certain. Go ahead, Selena. Thank you.
Yes, that is the main point. Yeah. The knowledge they're keeping us from because of the they're doing that way. They're abusing us that way. If we know we are equal, we are all equal, and we are part of same creator. So if we believe that in our heart and work that way, nobody is going to abuse us. But we don't believe that thing, so that's why we are getting abused again and again. Here, yeah, a lot of people, they know a lot of stuff, but they don't share. They don't want to talk. They don't want to talk. Plus, they are what is that? Confusing us, giving different
Yes, different
information.
scenarios. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, they are confusing us. So that is the main point is happening here. If we get the same knowledge and if we believe we are equal, nobody is going to abuse us. Nobody can do that, and we need to cooperate each other, not what is that, competition. Competition not going to give us the solution. We need to cooperate each other. That is the solution. Only that is the solution. That's it. Thank you.
A wise woman from Bengali. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Anyone else have any final thoughts they'd like to share? Okay, Alex, I am going to take the screen. Let's see, share.
Thank you, everybody, for allowing me to continue these presentations. And we will continue.
We appreciate everyone being here, and as we know, may you be proud of the work you do, and may you be proud of the person you are, and may you be proud of the difference you make, even though you're not seeing a lot of difference manifested at this point. Probably within your own structure, you're seeing a lot of difference, but we have still more work to do. It's not quite completed, so we continue on this path. And of course, employing the wisdom of the three wise men will help you along your journey to elevate and to elevate others. Remember what Mr. Kesh was just saying, how many people you've helped, how many people you've killed, how many people you've supported in a way will create your next position in the universe if that final bell calls for you. So the thinking good, the speaking good, and the acting good are very fundamental to understanding this. And of course, all the Christians missed it. That means about 2 billion people, including myself, until Mr. Kesh has revealed what the actual gifts were. We always thought they were matter state gifts. So employ these three kings, keep them close to you. They bring quite a bit of wisdom, peace, and shielding around your entire structure. And then you can be proud of the work you do and the difference you make. So thank you. And now I will play the Keep Kesh Foundation Free for Humanity, then the final disclaimer, and the meeting will end. Anyone else would like to add anything else to what we've talked about today or discussed? And again, as he said, the centuries is it'll take man thousands of years to open this up fully. Centuries is not long enough. Thank you all for being a part of this process and carrying a corner of, again, a very large carpet that we're laying out for humanity to enjoy. Thank you all. If there's no further comments, then we will proceed to closing. Remember, just a reminder that the testimonials meeting for the Kesh Foundation, if you have any sort of testimonial, this will be Monday at 8 p.m. Central European Summer Time. And this is in the same public room, the 939-474-503 on Zoom. So you can join Rick and the other knowledge seekers who'll be there, and many times it ends up being quite an interesting show. I think once some of these wellness centers come online more and more, and as Mr. Kesh said, what he did with bringing people out of coma was hidden within the Kesh Foundation structure for a number of years. It wasn't really brought out in public by Mr. Kesh. So I think we'll be seeing a lot of fantastic testimonials coming in the coming weeks and months when they start talking about vision or Parkinson's or Alzheimer's and many of the other things. And I'm sure there's a number of them have already been in a way completed, but again, they're probably hidden within the structure at this point of the Kesh Foundation. So thank you all, and let's keep Kesh Foundation free for humanity. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Alex, and thanks to each and every one of the participants today, whether you've been here on the soul level or you've been here as a physical participant. So thank you all.